we'll have Mr. Zajíček speak, and then if you want to help yourselves, please to feed over there. And then I know you've got some films to show. So we are delighted to have you here. We were just talking about the very tense and difficult situation in Ukraine, and I think it's a particularly fitting moment to discuss this subject here. We were talking about the deja vus that we're all having. So let me just briefly introduce our speaker. He is the Deputy Chief of Mission in the Czech Embassy here. After graduating from the University of Economics in Prague, he joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He was part of the European Union accession negotiations as a cabinet secretary of the Czech chief negotiator. He then moved to Brussels in 2003, where he spent over 6 years as the head of the ambassador's office, a member of the cabinet of the Czech Commissioner, and head of the internal market and energy section at the permanent representation of the Czech Republic to the European Union. And then from 2009 to 2011, he held the post of Director of EU Policies Department at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Prague. And since November 2011, he has been the Deputy Chief of Mission at the Embassy of the Czech Republic. So welcome.
Thank you very much for your kind words. Good afternoon, everyone. This year we celebrated the 45th anniversary of Jan Palach's dramatic self-immolation, which took place in 1969 in the protest of Soviet occupation of Czechoslovakia. And the Czechoslovak regime at that time tried to downplay the whole thing and conceal the whole thing in its own brutality. We are now here today to reflect a little bit on his sacrifice and what it actually meant for people at that time, but also for the following generation, including ours. We can also speak about, the symbol and the importance of such heroic act for protesting against totalitarian regime. And I will give you an overview of what has been happening for already quite some time in the world and what implications it brought. First of all, self-immolation is an old word that starts from Latin immolare, which means to sprinkle with sacrificial meal, to sacrifice. And that symbol is that you bring this highest sacrifice by setting yourself on fire. It is often done as a political protest and martyrdom. This is what self-immolation is about. We can go really back in the history, the 4th century, where Chinese Buddhists used to practice this as a protest. We can go even back to Hinduism, where Sati, one of the wives of the god Shiva, self-immolated herself because of the protest, how her father treated her husband. So there's a really long history of self-immolation. We often refer to these heroes or victims we want to describe as living torches. Now, in the more recent history, that the case that was brought to our attention was in 1963, the Buddhist monk of Taekwondo, who self-immolated himself as a protest according to the political regime in South Vietnam, and it really kind of sparked further developments across the globe. Let's be honest. We've experienced many of similar cases here in the U.S. It was only 2 years after that when a person and a Quaker from Baltimore named Norman Morrison actually set himself on fire in front of Secretary of Defense McNamara Pentagon windows as a protest against the U.S. participation in the ongoing war in Vietnam. He left 3 kids behind him, and many people may look at him as a stranger, not knowing what he was doing, mentally ill or so on. But I'll try to demonstrate that this is not necessarily the case for most of the people, that there is a rational or big idea behind what they are doing. Actually, the statistics speak very clearly. Since the 60s, there were over 500 cases across the globe where people set themselves on fire. Vast majority of them took place in India, and many of them took place in Vietnam, South Korea, but 29 cases in the US, which is quite a high number in my view. Now, I come from Prague, Czech Republic, so I will speak a little bit about the, at that time, referred to Eastern Bloc countries, and especially to one event that sparked so many tragical destinies, which was the Soviet occupation of Czechoslovakia in 1968. That kind of ended the experiment of bringing democracy into a socialist regime. Socialism with human face was the logo of that new or pro-reform oriented government, but that was ended with Soviet or Warsaw Pact tanks coming to the Czech Republic and Slovakia, and actually they stayed there for another 40 years. When they try to normalize, this is what you have to do, the normalization of the situation. But actually the first martyr was Mr. Żywiec, who was a Polish guy who, in response to the invasion to Czechoslovakia, set himself on fire at a stadium, and he has done that publicly so that everyone was aware of his fact. Of course, the communist regimes tried to hide this fact, but the message definitely got out. And I'm getting closer to the Czech case of Jan Palach, who was a student at the Charles University, one of the oldest in Central Europe. He was studying political economy and history, a handsome guy who had strong feelings about what happened. So on January 16th, 1968, he appeared on one of the most important squares in Prague, on the Wenceslav Square, which is kind of a symbol of Czech statehood, and he set himself on fire. He didn't die immediately, he only died 3 days after that, but he left letters inviting the communist regime or those that were too pro-Soviet to step down. He denied the occupation. He was very strong in this respect. He denied censorship that was already quite present at that time. He denied publishing the pro-Soviet paper called Pravda, the true Sprava, I'm sorry, the message. So this was a letter that he left behind, and even people that managed to talk to him before he died said that he strongly condemned the invasion. But not only that, that was just one part of it. He was definitely, denying the atmosphere in the society that led to something that was quite big. He reminded everyone of what the society should think about when a similar thing like that happens. So just to demonstrate what kind of reaction this provoked, which was unheard of for many years and even decades, I may say. We are gonna project you a very short, I wouldn't even say a movie, but a documentary, where you can feel what the atmosphere in the streets of Prague were during his funeral, which took place on January 25th. It literally got everyone from the country to rally behind him, and they all gathered in the streets of Prague just to pay tribute to late victim, as we might say.
I apologize, I'm trying to get back.
Don't worry. Well, what you will see in the picture is very symbolic as well. You will see, students. Naturally, he was a student at the Charles University. You will see elderly people coming, not only from Prague, but from all over the country. You can see, kids. You will see babies that were brought there. You will see actors, the intelligentsia of those that stayed in the country and didn't immigrate, which was the case for so many. This is the Wenceslav Square, exactly the place where Jan Palach set himself on fire. You see, he was a 20-year-old student. This is gonna take about 2.5 minutes, and it's probably not worth even commenting. This is the campus, it's the very heart of the Charles University called Clementinum, dates back to 1348. But it's not part of the castle, it was the old town square, and there was lines, long, several miles long lines that were leading to this Charles University campus, of which he was a student. So it was really a spark. This is why we are here today, to try to understand what kind of spark can be, sent from such a heroic deed. several actually examples followed. We never really learned about those because the communist propaganda wouldn't allow for anyone to learn. Everybody knew about Palach. This is why so many people came to the streets, but there were others. There were Jan Zajíček, Evgen Plotce, that self-immolated them as well in protest against the invasion. But you know, there were followers, so to say, across the Eastern Bloc. There was a young Hungarian guy. There was a Latvian student there as well, a pastor from Eastern Germany. So that was kind of a, I wouldn't say a movement, but it was a period of time where people used this form of protest because simply for many of them it was a hopeless situation, and they wanted to send out this very strong signal of a protest that actually was followed by the public and was suppressed by the regime. A couple of other interesting examples, actually, even from nowadays perspective. 1978, a guy named Musa Mahmud was a Crimean Tatar farmer that set himself on fire as a protest of deportations and killings of Crimean Tatars from Crimea. Very interesting from today's perspective. Of course, over 100 Tibetans set themselves on fire during four years as a protest against the communist regime in China. But there are even more recent examples last year and even this year in countries that you might not expect this to happen. In Azerbaijan last year as a protest against Aliyev, as a protest against corruption. Several people, were just unable to feed their families, and they choose this as a protest. But even Bulgaria, the latest example, is a country that joined the European Union. Sometimes the situation for people has become really hopeless. We don't speak too much about these things because we are kind of afraid of the reactions. We are afraid of a very easy reaction, which is that they are psychopaths. But it might be the case for some, I don't know. But why I'm describing this to you is to share with you my conviction that it is not definitely always the case. What this meant for the development of Czechoslovakia and the Velvet Revolution is another thing. 20 years after this event, in January 1989, and I can speak a bit personally more because I was there, although I was 14, so this is more or less the time when you start understanding what's going on. But my parents told me, and I was there on the Wenceslav Square. We were chased by the police with the water cannons and everything. Václav Havel and Charter 77 and the dissidents decided to pay tribute to the 20th anniversary of Jan Palach's self-immolation. Of course, they were detained by the state police, but actually there was a nice turnout, which is exceptional, of demonstrators. And actually the Palach's week, as we call it, in January 1989, led to what we call the Velvet Revolution later on. It was again first spark of a change, that maybe the regime was not that strong, and that there was a movement among the civil society that enough was enough. But again, Jan Palach's sacrifice was used again as a reason why to gather around and try to protest against the government. So this is actually what happened. Interestingly enough, this is where dreams come true. 1 year after that, President Havel was there in his capacity of president. He renamed one of the squares in Prague, probably with the nicest view that we have, as Jan Palach's square, and this is the place where the philosophical faculty headquarters building is. So all this happened within 1 year. We have got also one more thing to show you, but before that I want to disseminate this one page to all of you, so if you can simply pass that around, because I want to project to you another 2 or 3 minute video by Jan Václav Havel. He was not the president, he was a dissident in 1969, and these were the words that should serve in my, speaking to you as a bridge between the two events, the sacrifice of Jan Palach and what happened 20 years after that. This was kind of an open letter to the regime. This is young Václav Havel when he was a dissident, and I had an idea that you might listen to him, although not understanding what he says, just to get the atmosphere of what he's saying. That's why we brought the copies of the English translation.
Vážení přátelé, čin Jana Palacha je krajním výrazem bolesti nás všech, výkřikem, který se jediný člověk odhodlal zvolat za nás všechny. Právě proto je to však zároveň promyšlený politický čin. Musíme ho přijmout tak a jedině tak, jak byl myšlen. Jako výzvu k aktivitě, ke skutečně důslednému boji za vše, co upřímně považujeme za správné. Jako apel, který nás varuje před lhostejností, skepsí, beznadějí. V tom, co udělal Jan Palach, je kus důvěry v nás všechny. Je to šance, která byla nám živým dána. Chceme-li odvrátit další mladé lidi od jejich rozhodnutí, nestačí, abychom je přemlouvali, aby se nezabíjeli. To je málo. To je nepřesvědčí. A čin Jana Palacha by to znehodnotilo, protože by to nereagovalo na skutečné mravní a politické poselství, které v něm je, ale snižovalo by ho to na akt individuální sebevraždy. Máme jedinou cestu. Vést svou politickou při dál, vést ji až do konce. Ukázat těm, kteří jsou odhodláni se zabít, že jsme s to prosadit svou vůli živí. Musíme jim to ovšem dokázat praktickými činy. Vyzývám vládu, aby odvolala omezení, která byla v posledních týdnech dána sdělovacím prostředkům. Vyzývám ji, aby jasně zakázala šíření ilegálního časopisu Zprávy. Vyzývám předsednictvo Federálního shromáždění, aby neodkladně svolalo plenární schůzi Federálního shromáždění. Vyzývám poslance Federálního shromáždění, aby se zasadili o včasné vypsání voleb. Pane Bilaku, pane Indro, pane Koldere, pane Nový, pane generále Rytíři a všichni další. Pochopte, že váš postoj je cizí většině lidu. Pochopte to a dobrovolně se vzdejte svých politických funkcí. Možná právě vy máte teď možnost zabránit dalším tragédiím. Možná vaše děti studují. Možná jsou mezi vylosovanými, možná jsou na řadě. Pochopte, že máte poslední možnost udělat něco dobrého pro svůj národ, jimž se tak často zaklínáte. Vážení přátelé, nejsme na světě sami. Okolní svět jistě mluví do našeho osudu. Ale i my jsme součástí světa. I my máme proto právo mluvit do osudu světa. I my můžeme svět ovlivnit. A jak jinak ho můžeme ovlivnit než tím, že mu dáme všemi dostupnými způsoby najevo svou vůli a své smýšlení. Přijmout pasivně roli, kterou nám vykáží jiní, znamenalo by morálně se zabít. Smrt Jana Palacha chápu jako varování před morální sebevraždou nás všech.
Thank you. It's always moving to watch this, especially if you read the text, you see how universal the text is. It can be applied to so many developments in the world right now. The story continued. We all know how it went on with the Velvet Revolution in our country. Jan Palach and Jan Zajíček were awarded the highest order of Czechoslovakia, which is the order of Tomáš Garrigue Masaryk, the first Czechoslovak president, whose wife was Charlotte, and she was of American origin. So that this is also why there is this very strong transatlantic bond in our history. But all of that led into something, into a legacy. Václav Havel died. It was not the saddest days in my life on December 18th, 2011. But now I'm coming to a point where we are part of creating history on an everyday basis. What can we actually do? And we have said to ourselves, and I think the foreign policy of the Czech Republic has been a clear demonstration of this, that we want to carry on the torch of the ideas of both Jan Palach and Václav Havel. This is why we are sometimes too stubborn on the international scene when we see that human rights and democracy are not respected. This is why the Czechs were the only country in the European Union that supported US and Canada against the Palestinian. We can all think about that what we want, but against the Palestinian bit in the United Nations. This is why we are sometimes too stubborn on the situation in Cuba. We are kind of the hardliners within the EU, and this is not necessarily appreciated position, but because of what I have just shown to you, and the purpose of my presentation here is really to share with you that these concrete examples are forming the way how people think in my country, and why this is so important on our foreign policy agenda. This is why we are putting the situation in countries like Cuba, Venezuela, Belarus under limelight. This is why we do, together with the US, very concrete projects like Václav Havel Journalism Fellowship, that we have got the Radio Free Europe seat in Prague, and there are journalists coming from countries that might have problems with freedom of speech and press. They come to our country and they spend some time in the US as a joint project. That's one of the very concrete examples. Of course, we have been working very closely with Georgetown, and we have just inaugurated Václav Havel's place, and I was there moderating the whole discussion when we brought the best minds to the US to openly demonstrate that we are carrying the torch. I can speak of so many other concrete projects. I will not. I will just say that for us it's extremely important, and I always loved what Václav Havel said, that he doesn't consider himself to be a hero. He just did things that he knew that if he didn't do them, his conscience would not allow him to remain silent. I really love this expression, and this is what is deeply embedded into, I would say, majority of Czechs, and this is why I'm 100% sure that we will remain on this path, and together with the US, we will not cease in fighting for democracy and human rights across the world. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Very strong statement. Let me encourage you, we should get going with our discussion. I want to thank you for a very kind of inspiring and also sobering talk, and makes you question, what it is about certain individuals that they have the courage and the dedication to, either in the case of Palach, self-immolate, or in the case of President Havel, to endure long prison terms and harassment for decades by the government for believing in their principles. But I guess I wanted to bring it maybe to a more contemporary question today, which is, we are facing, once again, we were talking about Ukraine or whatever, but anyway, in the kind of, at least post-Soviet world, many of these issues, of course, are not resolved. It's been, more than 20 years since the Soviet Union collapsed, the end of the Cold War, but we see things are unsettled. Russia obviously interested in maybe changing this order. So how does a country like the Czech Republic and the other, Western democracies, the United States, what can we do now, let's say, in that part of the world to try and support and promote these values?
I think there's a very good question. We are a 10 million country, together with the Slovaks, 15 million former Czechoslovakia, which doesn't make us a superpower. but it does make us in a way a superpower in terms of having experienced the transformation process in a relatively short period of time. What happened after the Velvet Revolution is an economic, I would say, miracle in a way for us. Really becoming Prague is now the 5th or 6th richest regions in Europe. We are a stable democracy, although one has to remind ourselves that we have lived through unprecedented long period of time of democracy. We just have to picture that out. Our country was established in 1918. It was 20 years before the Munich Agreement and then what followed. It was just a couple of years after the end of the Second World War, before the communist putsch, and actually we are now living through the longest period of democracy, which in logic terms is nothing. It's 25 years. We will all be celebrating this fall. I hope there is going to be a big event as well in DC. And there is a project I may signal even to you that we would like to succeed, although we are not too much public with it, but we want to install Václav Havel's bust in the Congress on the Capitol, which is going to be probably a big thing. And around that we are going to do a lot of events just to commemorate where we are 25 years after that. So we have an incredible experience with changing the regime from a values point, democratic points, economic points, cultural points. So it was a complete overhaul of our country, and we are ready, and we have been doing that to provide our experience on lessons learned and what mistakes not to repeat to our partners, especially to the East. And some of the projects that I mentioned that we are doing together with the US, they are specifically oriented at this. That is, we've got a transformation compendium that we are ready to share. Some people said, let's share it with the Arab Spring. We try, but then you figure out that they are not really exactly two things that are extremely close one to another. But in the post-Soviet area and the Western Balkans, this is something that people listen to when we speak, because we are kind of a success story and we have all gone through similar things. So not necessarily when the US would be explaining that to the guys, they would get it. If it's us together working on these things, and this has been happening. I just wished for this to become even more and more visible, and more money being spent on this, which is in our view that no matter how long it can take, it can seem to be futile. Václav Havel's sacrifice seemed to be futile for so many years. But at the end, actually, we were returning back to this sacrifice, and this was what kept us strong when we did the overhaul. So to answer your question, our let's say role number one is people-to-people contacts with the civil society, trying to keep the civil society alive, because in longer term, or hopefully even medium term, they are all going to end up on a similar path as we did. And this is where we see the biggest value added. Of course, we try to help economically. Our countries, the Visegrad 4, Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovakia, have always advocated for a strong policy of the European Union towards the Eastern Partnership. Now we see many people didn't believe us, especially around the Arab Spring period of time. We said, why should we care about that region? We said, if anything goes wrong in that part of the world, immediately the world's attention will turn to it. Well, I'm happy that we were right, but we need to take a very active approach, not just wait and see, and try to invest into the countries, into stability of these countries, and people-to-people contacts that will eventually enable for a change towards a sustainable future.
Thank you. Questions, comments? Yeah.
Hello, I'm Jan Palach. I'm a Czech student here at Georgetown, and thank you for the presentation. Two questions, if I may. First of all, thinking about the legacy of Jan Palach, how do you see the education in our country being focused on this person? I just looked at, there was a survey in January, and out of 12 students asked, only 2 people knew and 11 were almost unsure about when it happened, why it happened, and so forth. So what is the sort of approach and how you think about it, whether we are doing enough to educate our young people? And secondly, thinking about Ukraine today and human rights and how we promote them, looking at my country and then at Poland, I think there's quite a stark contrast that we see Polish are doing probably much more, at least on visible, very visibly, I think. Where do you see the Czech Republic in the Visegrad group? How much have we done actually besides this general talk? And maybe more broadly, here in the US, what have you, I know you participate in consultations with the other EU countries, so what has been the most up-to-date thing that you can share with us on that front as well?
Okay, on the younger generation, not knowing who Palach was, and for many, this becoming just one of the names that are referred to from a historical perspective, the guys after whom squares are being named. This is, in a way, this is inevitable because sooner or later they may put Jan Palach in the same category of Charles the IV, living in the 14th century. Of course, if you ask me how to reinsert this into curricula, it's a problem of every one of us. We have become a bit too complacent. Let's be honest about what we have achieved and what kind of sacrifice it took. So it's role of every one of us. I wouldn't blame the curricula. I'm pretty sure that the professors will be teaching about Jan Palach, but you are right that it's still kind of a relatively recent history for many of us, and we need to be reminded of these concrete examples. 20 years from now, probably not everyone will know who Havel was. Honestly, let's honestly be, and it's our task to prevent that from happening. So that he's not just another guy that has got a beautiful bench and linden tree a couple of yards from here. So it's up to us, honestly, and when we are bringing up our kids, to tell them what it takes for our freedom. We are not very good at it, I'll be honest with you. Czechs especially haven't been too good in self-promotion and promotion what we have been doing. It's just not part of who we are. The Poles and the Hungarians have always been better in selling EU membership, their history. Czechs are extreme pessimists, and they have some good historical reasons for being pessimistic in the Czech lands. But there's something that we need to fight on a case-by-case basis. I have to start with myself and spread this around. This is an occasion, but when you go back, you just speak to your friends, and when you are educating your kids. I just got two very young ones. I'm going to tell them, and that this is what I can do. Sooner or later, it's going to become part of the curriculum. But if you hear statistics, I'm not sure if you do a statistics on some important U.S. personalities from the past, to what extent the Americans would know about that. But self-complacency is something that we have to fight with. On the visible project, I just demonstrated to you the Czech-American project. There are several others, but the Eastern Partnership Summit was for the first time actually was founded in Czech Republic during the Czech presidency. We have never sold that to anyone. It's kind of perceived as the Swedish-Polish idea. Honestly speaking, it was our intention to do it. It was during the Czech presidency in Prague. We will do another 5-year anniversary event later this year. And again, we have not been able to sell it to anyone. Combination of modesty, partially, and simply not being, too capable in self-promotion. But that Eastern Partnership is an EU policy. Is to a large extent thanks to us. On the Visegrad front, the Prime Minister just agreed to beef up the International Visegrad Fund for concrete projects that are directed to the post-Soviet region. And these are, exchange of students, cultural events, scholarships. This money goes specifically to these, events. So there are a lot of things going on. The four foreign ministers, or 3 ministers plus the one deputy foreign minister, left for Ukraine, both Kiev and Donetsk. Very early after things gone wrong. The prime ministers met like on the following day after things happened, and we try to be, Visegrad 4 is quite a strong. If you want to work together, we can become quite strong. I always use this example that on the qualified majority voting, the Visegrad 4 enjoys the same power as Germany and France together. Of course, none of us is Germany or France, but if we are able to find a common denominator, and the Eastern Partnership has been the common denominator on our EU policy, we have to explain this to our European colleagues. We will not probably come up with the miracle solutions just by ourselves, but what we can do is to enlighten and to share our historical experience and why we consider it to be necessary to invest into this part of the world to our colleagues from Portugal, Italy, Spain, that are more distant to it and they don't have the direct historical experience. So, and of course there's bilateral aid that we want to provide, but of course we are not the richest guys, but at least we try to show to the others that we are courageous enough to travel to that place, deal with the guys, and come up with suggestions that for some are too radical, but then the European mainstream somehow has to be formed. So it's good that you have someone with rather, I would say, strong views, because there will always be someone with a bit less strong views, to put it like that, so that we come up within the 28 member states to a, I would say, reasonable position towards the conflict. And we managed to do so. And if you read the discussions, how they took place within the EU, we will always see that our foreign ministers, and the day after tomorrow our prime ministers are going to be quite vocal in this respect.
Thank you. By the way, in answer to your question about Americans, the majority of Americans are incredibly ignorant about their own history. I want to get into that.
Stanley Kober, Georgetown alum. You mentioned in passing the Buddhist immolations. That occurred in Vietnam. And that did not lead to a triumph of democracy. They were protesting us. And ultimately, that started a process that led to the communist takeover of Vietnam. This is a double-edged sword. As we see in our own day, a cult of martyrdom. Every society honors those who fell. We have our Memorial Day. And if the students here, you're here for our Memorial Day ceremony, I always recommend seeing it. But shortly after the Enlightenment, Jan Palach, in his addresses to the German nation, said that there is a higher object than the usual one of maintaining internal peace, property, personal freedom, and the life and well-being of all. The noble-minded man joyfully sacrifices himself, and the ignoble man must likewise sacrifice himself. We saw in the 20th century what that led to. And so, and I just want to balance this out. I can understand honoring those who sacrifice themselves. But in doing that, you have to keep in mind the purpose for which they sacrifice, so that the means don't become the end.
No, that is a brilliant comment. Anytime something like that happens, I think part of the message that is being sent out is that it calls for a social response, a social response. There can be so many various reasons for that. like hopeless economic situation which can take place, deprivation of human rights. So the causes may be different. It's up to the society how it reacts to that thing. So today it was not about saying that everyone that sets him or herself on fire necessarily meant to do a good thing from our perspective, but what it definitely always has meant is that it's a strongest possible signal on an issue that people should react to what extent people react positively or negatively, how they take that. It's up to the society, and I would tend to hope that the societies are intelligent enough, people are intelligent enough to react to that in a positive way if it's done with a noble idea. So again, I cannot judge on each and every of these cases. Maybe there are other solutions when you are deprived of economic rights, when you are in a very bad economic situation. Maybe this is not the solution. And I'm definitely not advocating, and neither is President Havel, that we should follow the example of setting ourselves on fire. It's just to remind ourselves to stop a little bit in time and think about the world that we're living in, and be it from a positive or a negative. It's just to react to such signal, and if we are a ripe society, we should be able to come up with an intelligent social response.
Thank you. Other questions, comments? Or while you're thinking, so did you have a question? Please.
I know this is very complex, but what in your mind, and I know it's not one thing or the other, but what do you think is sort of the difference between what happened in the Czech Republic and what is happening now in the Ukraine that allows the body in the Ukraine seemingly to come apart so quickly, whereas things progress, I know slowly, but they progress in the Czech Republic to the extent that they separate themselves.
This is a very difficult question. There can be official replies to that, and there can be other replies. I'll try to do a combination. Well, the conclusions of the foreign ministers have been quite, EU foreign ministers have been quite clear on this. This is an act of aggression. It's intolerable, and we have, kind of demanded that the troops return back. So far, so good. If you ask me from a Central European viewpoint on this, I will just speak about parallels, and we have spoken about it with Angela. There are some historical parallels in the past that somehow ring us a bell when we observe the situation right now. In a way, the process that ended up for President Yanukovych was triggered by him not signing the association agreement with the European Union. Now, in Czechoslovakia in 1947, the government at first subscribed to the so-called Marshall Plan, but then they went for consultations to a certain guy named Stalin, and they returned back to Prague, denouncing the help. And it sparked a lot of negative developments after that. When we hear about protecting minorities in another country, it cannot but ring you a bell of a development in late 30s, protecting other language minorities in Europe. I'm not comparing anyone to anyone here, but just to share with you that simply when we hear about this, we have got a feeling we have heard about this in the past. And then you learn about this letter from President Yanukovych sent to President Putin The occupation of Czechoslovakia was based on a letter sent by a couple of powerful communist leaders inviting the Soviet Union to help us stabilize the situation that was about to get out of control. So there was a letter, and the friendly enemies, the friendly enemies, that's a good notion, the friendly enemies within the Warsaw Pact reacted, and the tanks appeared in Czechoslovakia. So there are so many, similarities to historical developments that we need to be cautious. That is the point. Now we can spend hours about the situation in the Crimea, the Russian majority there. 200 years ago, this was not the case by far. We all know about Stalin's deportations of the Crimean Cossacks that changed the balance to what it is right now. But let's not speak about a noble cause when you protect your minority in another country, when you use, troops. That's I would say the divisive line. We all know this is a problem. Nobody knows more that this is a problem than Central Europeans. These are still, issues that are alive. We just hope that we will bury them all the time. All of a sudden they reappear somehow, especially in the pre-election campaigns in so many countries. So for us, the bottom line is that we can discuss about that. They are OEC instruments, they are United Nations instruments, but as soon as you send troops to another country to protect the minority, this is the breach of the international law for any one of us. Now it's probably started.
Yeah, my colleague Charles King had a very good piece in the New York Times, I guess yesterday, about you can't go around organizing the world on the principle that if you speak the same language as me, then I have the right to send troops in to protect you. But you're right. I mean, the parallels with Czechoslovakia are 1938, 1947, 1968. That's all there. Other questions? Let me ask you another one. I mean, you talked about the Visegrad group. Let me talk about one of your Visegrad countries, Hungary. Now, Hungary's in the European Union. It appeared to make a successful transition, but we all have great concerns about what's happening domestically in Hungary in terms of the freedoms you've talked about, also in terms of the attitude towards, other Hungarians.
Just we are not being too public with what we are doing.
And I presume it's possible to cooperate, obviously, on some very important issues for all of you, even though you may see things differently on other questions.
That's about finding the highest common denominator. On some of the things we will not be able to deliver because the positions are simply too different. On others, like actually the Eastern Partnership right now, it's a thing that we feel quite confident about. But we are happy for being able for this to become kind of an ocean, that people start knowing what Visegrad is about, probably much more than if we are discussing and trying to convince others about our views on a separate basis.
Other questions or comments?
There was one more.
Sorry, yeah.
I lived in Prague, and after the war, but what is it about the Czech spirit compared to the Ukrainian spirit? I know there's some similarities in the Ukrainian sounds more to me like Czech language than Russian language, but what is there in your view the sort of psychosocial difference that makes one?
Well, we used to be one country.
In terms of this.
That's quite an interesting. There's always this joke that a grandmother living in Uzhgorod tells to everyone, I've been to, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Russia, and to travel that much. I said, no, I never left my hometown. But this is, geopolitics speaking. There used to be a period of time when the Zakarpatska Ukraine was part of our country. So there is, but that's the western part of it. It is probably true that Ukraine is two or more countries within one country. That have to, you know, the Russian minorities, the views towards, you know, nationalism or pro-Russian, pro-European Union or pro-Russia, I would tend to, there are, you know, similar patterns. They are, you know, the diverging views in both parts of the Ukraine. The western part of it, in a way, is closer to the, I would say, Central European mindset. It is true, while the eastern part is closer to the Russian, you know, way of thinking. Don't forget that, you know, Ukraine, in a way, is a cradle to big Russia. So there are different views within one country for sure, but on the language side, we all had to learn Russian, so that means you more or less understand what the Ukrainians are saying. It's a Slavic language as well. But you know, a lot of proximities. We've got a lot of sympathy for what you know, people have been doing there, while not really understanding what other parts of Ukraine are doing. But none of this should be, you know, a pretext for you know, creating new borders. So, yeah, I think we are in the 21st century, and we should be able, irrespective of whether you feel a bit closer to the west or to the east, for doing away with borders that we have all agreed on.
First of all, Jaroslav, thank you very much for your presentation. We've all seen and heard, and more now, yes, but more these days, there's the eastern Russian-speaking part of Ukraine, the western Ukrainian-speaking part. But in some of the reporting I've seen, and there's probably have too, there is not that much of a solidity in the eastern part. There's a lot of split between Russian speakers and Ukrainian speakers, perhaps heavier on the Russians, I don't know. What is your knowledge of that?
Well, no.
Anybody?
The statistics vary. You know, some people say about 30% of the eastern part, or even more, are, you know, Russian speaking. If you ask them, do you consider your home country to be Ukraine or Russia, I would still think that you will get in majority views the Ukrainian reply. At the same time, Russians have been quite effective in terms of issuing passports to the Russian-speaking guys, which is now kind of used as a pretext because Russia has to protect their citizens, not only Russian-speaking, but their citizens. I didn't. You said that. But there is a policy like that. We already today learned that President Putin intends to take care of more than just Crimean Russian-speaking or Russians, and that is the point. You know, there can be already in some towns to the east it starts happening that the pro-Russian Ukrainians or Russians tend to ignore the new Ukrainian government. And this is going to be a big problem if there is an interference coming from Russia or from anyone else that will incentivize for the Russian-speaking people or Ukrainians or Russians in that region to take any kind of action. But it's historically such a complicated issue that, you know, evolved in the ups and downs about the percentage of, you know, large percentage of Russians or Russian-speaking people living in the Baltic countries. You know, we have got over 100,000 Ukrainians in our. But, you know, again, back to my point, we have to deal with the minorities in a 21st century manners. That's
100,000 in the Czech Republic.
Yeah, Ukrainians. You know, many and more Russians are.
Ukrainian speaking or Russian speaking?
They'll be Ukrainian speaking. They'll be Ukrainian speaking, and more Russians actually. You know, if you travel to Karlovy Vary, Carlsbad. Russian is a common language there, so but we are working on an everyday basis. We treat them as minorities as we are supposed to treat them and never, you know, thought of expelling them. If they try to proclaim now that they don't care what the Czech government is doing there in the town where they might have, you know, considerable minority, what happens? You know, where do we stop with this? That's my issue with the thing.
And you should remember, you know, that in 1991, the vast majority of citizens of what's now Ukraine voted for an independent, sovereign Ukraine. And 54% of the people in Crimea voted to be part of an independent Ukraine and not part of Russia. And I think the other point you raised it is, if you listen to our media, people get, you know, they confuse someone who speaks Russian, a Russian speaker, with someone who's an ethnic Russian. They kind of lump them all together. Because there are Russian speakers in Ukraine, and even some ethnic Russians who feel that they're citizens of Ukraine and don't want to be part of Russia. So this will get such a complicated ethnic and linguistic mix, right? That the reporting isn't always very accurate. Other questions or comments? Well, please join me in thanking Ms. President. And are there going to be more events this year commemorating Palach? And then obviously you talked about in the fall having a bust in the US Congress.
There will be, no, I'm not really sure whether on Palach, we have on a yearly basis something that is called Mutual Inspirations Festival for 2 months, September and October. We dedicate to Czech or Czech-American. Last year it was Václav Havel, so we had Václav Havel events all over the place. One of the culmination points was this bench. We are going to have something you know, similar, but maybe ironically this year is going to be dedicated to Kafka. So a lot of, you know,
another great Czech.
a lot of, you know, and of course,
what anniversary is it of Kafka's?
No, it's just we chose Kafka to be, you know, after Miloš Forman, the film director, after Antonín Dvořák, the composer, after Havel. This is another one.
And one more question.
Yeah.
You said earlier that you didn't think that you, the Czechs, were as good as promoting yourself. That wasn't your word, and I used it, as are the Hungarians and others. What do you think the Slovaks, your former co-passions?
We are so similar. We are so similar that it's very difficult to distinguish. Now, Slovaks are in the Eurozone now. They are ahead of us in a way. So they have, wow, that is, they have distinguished themselves from, you know, from Czechoslovakia by, you know, becoming part of the core of the European Union, of the Eurozone. While we have been waiting a little bit what happens. So almost everything that happens, of course, Czechs probably have bigger affection for Havel than the Slovaks. They would always treasure former Prime Minister Dubček on a similar way. So there are nitty-gritty differences, but in general terms we think of the developments in the world in a very same way, and I still don't distinguish actually that much. It was just recently the Slovak Prime Minister that came up with an idea that we should maybe go back to the made in Czechoslovakia, because it was such a good brand that when it's now Czech Republic, you know, we had an issue here in the US mixing Czech Republic with Chechnya. And no one really knows where the Slovakia, Slovenia. So actually, there is a lot of nostalgia about Czechoslovakia.
Maybe Czechoslovakia will become one country again.
One day.
Yeah.